This portrait is of Pupa Gilbert, who's a biophysics professor at the UW-Madison who also works in geology and chemistry. I had a chance to talk with Pupa about her work, and I'm sharing some of our conversation here. So Pupa, tell me about your research. I know you study the growth of coral and other biominerals.
So one of the main things that I've done in the last few years is to develop a method that's called polarization-dependent imaging contrast mapping, with which I can tell the crystal orientation of carbonate crystal or phosphate crystals with 10, 20 nanometer spatial resolution and display this orientation. If you look at the C-axis of a crystal, I can display the three-dimensional orientation. So I have an in-plane angle and an off-plane angle that I represent as hue and brightness.
Oh, so you have a 3D representation on a 2D plane then.
Exactly. And so you see these incredible images that are insanely colorful. Every little thing about them is mathematically defined, rigorously measured. Absolutely nothing is left to the artist. Nothing. And they're way better than anything I can ever do as an artist, which gives me such a kick. I love it. If I had to actually invent a system, I wouldn't be as good as nature. And of course, the fact that it's so visual as a visualization method is really important.
And so what are you doing to create these images?
Yeah, so I do PEM spectral microscopy, which is photoelectron emission spectral microscopy. I go to the synchrotron to do it. It's done in the soft X-ray region. And we rotate the linear polarization vector by 90 degrees, and every 5 degrees take an image, and then we do a best fit of every pixel and figure out how the C-axis is rotated from that best fit.
Okay. And so the different crystal orientations will reflect the electrons.
Exactly. Direction of the C-axis. In every pixel, there is a crystal, and if the C-axis is parallel to the polarization vector, we have a maximum at the oxygen K-edge spectrum, whereas if it's perpendicular, it's a minimum. But the intensity of this very strong pi-star peak at the oxygen K-edge spectrum is strongly dependent on orientation. So I sit at that photon energy where that peak variation is maximum, and then I rotate the polarization. And so I acquire a full field image with 1 million pixels at one polarization, then rotate polarization by 5 degrees, acquire another. When I'm done with 90-degree polarization, I have 19 images and mount them as a stack. And for every pixel, I solve the best fit. And I know quantitatively what the orientation of that crystal is.
Okay, and from there you know how strong the material is, how it grows, etc.
Exactly.
So along with science, you're also an artist, right? What kind of art do you make?
Yeah, so I like painting acrylic. It's all hard edge, lots of masking tape. It's also realist. It is figurative, but it's impossible landscapes. There's always me in these landscapes, and it never looks like me. It actually looks like a woman all covered up with black clothing and lots of waves. So it looks like tunics or curtains that will make a lot of waves like this on the fabric, because I really like the chiaroscuro. And I like to do that with blue. And so I enjoy doing that tremendously. And then I like to have either screwed up perspectives or impossible columns or strange geometries that are partly inspired by classical architecture, like, for example, arches and columns and things like this, but always screwed up, always impossible. So they can only happen in my mind. So it's very far from photographic, because if you can't take a photo of it, it's not worth painting it. So I call them my alternative realities.
Do you see your art and science building off of each other?
Oh yeah, very much. A lot of people in art are inspired by science. What's rare, and I think I'm super fortunate at being able to do this, I actually have art inspiring science. So what I like is to figure out formation mechanisms of natural biominerals. you can't imagine how many of them I've discovered by coloring images. It's mostly scanning electron microscopy images that I artificially color in Photoshop. But I don't color them at random. I give myself a rule and I say, okay, if these features look ... a certain characteristic that I'm interested in at that point, I make them blue. If they look this other way or anything else, I'll make them green. And then I'll see where I go. And while I'm doing this, I find that I had to redefine the boundaries of what I know and what I don't know, and my interpretation of what I'm looking at. Once you look at an image in excruciating detail because you're coloring it, you learn so much more than just looking at an image. But what's interesting is that, as I said at the beginning, a lot of science has already inspired art. But almost never has art inspired science. And so I consider this really cool when I managed to make discoveries because of the art.
Yeah, that really is unique. So how did you get interested in science?
Oh, I've always been. I don't remember the time in which I wasn't interested in science. I've always been incredibly curious, very good in math and physics. And so basically it was a no-brainer.
Any specific memories from childhood of being interested in something?
Oh, a gazillion different things. I would come up with questions like, can ants see microbes? Because microbes are so much smaller than people. Obviously, we can't see them, but ants are not that much bigger than a microbe. So, lots of other things like, how do nails grow? How can something be attached and grow at the same time? It's completely mind-boggling. And all sorts of other things like this, ever since I was a little kid. And being a biophysicist, I get to play with all these kind of questions and figuring out how phenomenal materials like mollusk shell nacre forms. It's 3,000 times more resistant to fracture than aragonite, yet it's made 95 to 99% of aragonite. So how do you get to outperform the sum of the parts of a material by that much? We don't know how to do that with synthetic materials. So it fascinates me that this has evolved in nature, and I like to understand how it works and how it's formed by the animal and how biology harnesses the laws of physics and chemistry in biology for the evolutionary advantage of the organism. So that's the point of studying biominerals that I do.
Those sound like questions that really formed your research now, starting young.
Exactly.
So where did you grow up?
In Rome, Italy.
In Rome, okay. And how long did you stay there?
Until I started coming to the US regularly in 1989. I was 25 at the time. For 10 years, I came to Madison. I went back and forth, and I started with a couple weeks a year, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the end, in 99, when I actually moved to Madison, up until then, I was actually spending 6 months a year here, and the rest in Italy and Switzerland, where I had 2 permanent positions. I was doing beam time at the synchrotron here, so I went back and forth a lot, and I enjoyed it tremendously. I mean, 3 separate lives, 3 languages, 3 currencies. It was really quite interesting.
The synchrotron is California?
No. Previously, it was the one here in Madison. It was in Stoughton, but now it has been closed since 2014. So I started using it for 10 years. Then when they offered me a professorship, I came to campus as a full professor at the age of 35. Actually, I broke a few records there. I actually got my PhD super early at 23. There were only 2 people getting their PhD in physics in Italy at the age of 23. One was Enrico Fermi, and the second was me.
Wow, that's really cool. And what did you study?
Biophysics.
Oh, okay.
I actually was trained in both physics and biology and chemistry, and I was a biophysicist to begin with. Well, and I also added geoscience, because when I started working in biomineralization, of course, it became important that I learned about crystals and minerals. So that, and material science as well, because the characteristics of the biominerals are very relevant to material science, which is interestingly related to evolution, So for
Yeah.
me, it's very exciting to learn about materials performances as well.
So, where do you see you and your research in 10 years? What do you hope to have accomplished?
Well, I'm going to make it environmentally important. So 10 years from now, I hope to have demonstrated that all coral reefs form via amorphous precursors,
Hmm.
that they are closed systems, and that because they are closed systems, so they can resist ocean acidification. And I hope to be able to use this discovery to actually cool the temperature of the water locally so that we don't need to worry about the chemistry of the water, just the temperature, which in
Hmm.
principle is a little bit easier to control. So all
Yeah.
you want to do is screen the sunlight a little bit. You can think about canopies, you can think about artificial clouds, you can think about a floating thingy on the surface of water, whatever
Yeah.
that could be. So somehow blocking a little bit of the sunlight, therefore saving coral reefs from the impending doom. That will get me a kick. This is where I really hope my science is going.
Good. I hope so too. I'd love to see that in 10 years.
Yeah,
This was great. Thanks for talking with me today.
my pleasure. Take care and best of
Okay.
luck with everything. Take
You
care.
too,
Bye-bye.
Pupa.